Independent, local, produced by Homeslice.
This is Chris Hornick with the Rapid City Post, interviewing Dan Ahlers, the South Dakota Democratic governor nominee, on July 7th, 2026.
Okay, so what are the core issues you see you need to address, and both locally, like here in Pennington County and Rapid City, and also the state?
So that's a great question. What I'm hearing from folks is the number one that comes through all the time is healthcare. It means a little different thing in different parts of the state, but overall, access is a huge problem, and that's not just in our rural areas anymore. We're starting to see it in our urban cities like Rapid City and Sioux Falls. I've experienced it firsthand myself with my dad's health issues over the last few months, and one of my friends that recently had a heart attack and stroke and is now in Omaha because he can't get what he needs in Sioux Falls. So that's a problem. Affordability has come up quite a bit when it comes to healthcare, and housing. Housing has been a big one. We have a housing shortage and a lack of affordable housing. So from younger folks, I'm hearing a lot that, the thought of buying a house just isn't in their immediate plans. It's not even in their 5-year plan. So if you want to keep young people here, if you want to keep talent here, you've got to not only have good jobs, but you got to have a place for them to live. And they want homes. They want a place to live, raise a family, and grow old in. That's part of the American dream, and that seems to be people feel like that's out of reach. And then that pivots into things like property taxes. It's been a discussion. I don't see the other side providing a lot of real solutions for that, at least not realistic ones. For some that talk about eliminating property taxes altogether, that's just not realistic. That's how you pay for your police officers. That's how you pay for your firefighters. That's how you pay for your schools. That's how you pay for your ambulances. And they're not providing a real viable option to make that up. If you go with one of the candidates, they're shifting it to sales tax. Well, sales tax affects those with the lowest income the most. And for those rural areas that your folks go and shop, a county over at the Watertown Walmart or something like that, that's not going to help them. That's not going to solve the problem. So we one of the things that they haven't talked about and is a real solution, something that can impact a lot of people in South Dakota today, is the fact that we already have a refund program and a tax freeze program for our elderly, for our veterans, and for people with disabilities. And that's a start. So that's one program that I found it very interesting. Not one of the other candidates has talked about this. If we only have 675 people that are taking part in that program. So why aren't more taking part in it? So I think a lot of it's because we don't talk about it. People don't realize it exists. So we got to talk about it. We got to make sure that application process is easy. I know from my time in the legislature that sometimes we have these programs, but we don't make them easy because leadership doesn't want people using it. They want to minimize exposure to cost. And that's how they do it, by making things difficult. You need to look at the income level. Is that income level set at an appropriate rate? Does it need to be higher to include more people? Then the second part of that is going to take a little more work is looking at how we assess our homes. We treat them like commodities, and people don't buy their homes to sell them; they buy them to live in them. They buy them, like I said before, to raise a family and grow old in, and hopefully, if we're fortunate enough, we get to die in our homes, right? So we need to find a way and work with our local governments and our assessors to have laws that assess our properties fairly and equitably. And what I mean by that is you look at my house. My house is a great one to use because it's a cap home that was purchased out of the Sears and Roebuck catalog. There's hundreds of them across South Dakota. And it's 980 square feet. I have one bathroom. In Del Rapids, it's assessed at right around $250,000. There's an identical home in Lyon, South Dakota, in Minnehaha County, that has a finished basement and 2 bathrooms that's worth about $30,000 less than mine.
Why? Why is that home that has actually more finished square footage worth less? I own 2 commercial buildings on Main Street, Del Rapids. That mill levy rate is higher. Yet I pay $1,000 less on that 5,400 square foot building than I do on my 960, 980 square foot house. The system's out of whack, and I guess what I'm advocating for is fairness. But those are real solutions, and those are things that we can work out. So, I mean, that's one. I think particularly, and I thought, might just be, an issue that I heard a lot about West River was water. But water and conservation has come up everywhere in our state. Whether you're a Republican or Democrat, East River, West River, North, South ends of the state, tribes, everybody's talking about water and conservation. So we have to look at it a couple of ways. We have to look at access. There's a need for access. Growth depends on access. The flip side of that is, how are we going to be responsible with the usage of water? Are there better policies or better building practices, things that will help us use less water to make it go further? That brings in the discussion of data centers. And data centers are a really big concern for folks right now. And I think it's a valid concern. I think the legislature did the right thing by pressing the pause button. And we need to make sure that anybody, data center or any other company that wants to come into South Dakota, is going to be a responsible neighbor, be good about using resources, not have their stuff built on a taxpayer dime. These companies can afford to pay for those things. If they want to be here, they need to play by a good set of rules and be good neighbors. Local people need to have a say in the process. And I think that then we can have responsible economic growth.
You touched on healthcare. Currently, we're in Pennington County. We're having a major issue with our ambulance funding. The city is I'm going to try to get these facts correct. They're being discussed actually like right now as we sit. We have a reporter covering it right now. The city is no longer going to cover the outside of the city ambulance coverage because they can't afford it. And we worry about around here. Fire is a major issue. I mean, we had fires yesterday. How do you see where is the state's responsibility with covering ambulance coverage and covering fire coverage?
I happen to be on the Del Rapids Ambulance Board, so this is an issue that's near and dear to me personally, but I know it's also been a challenge across the state. So certainly can understand the budget constraints of the city. Now, the Del Rapids Ambulance, we cover more than just the city of Del Rapids. We cover the interstate. We cover other communities and assist and collaborate with them. I think what needs to happen at a local level is collaborations with local townships, other towns and communities and areas that might serve to make sure that they can get and secure additional funding. But I also think the state needs to recognize our ambulance services as an essential service. We don't do that here. We recognize firefighters, police officers, and a host of others, but we don't recognize ambulance. And it seems a little silly since they're part of that trifecta, right? When you think of who shows up first for a first responder, you have police officers, firefighters, and ambulances. So why are we treating them different? And I think doing that, we should be looking at setting some money aside to help and assist with that. We can by no means fund all of it, but I think this is where you build partnerships and you look at the shared responsibilities that are out there, because these ambulances are not just covering a community. They're many times covering surrounding communities and areas outside of that typical jurisdiction.
The runoffs coming here shortly. It's July 28th. Very odd for any state. Are you going to be running your campaign differently or different messaging or anything depending on whether Roden or Doden wins this runoff?
There are nuances, because they're different people, right? And so I think there'll be things that we talk about more, depending on who the candidate is. But I'm really focused on just listening to the people of South Dakota and focusing on what I bring to the table and why they should vote for me. I think that it's good to have compare and contrast. I don't like what I see out of the Republican candidates with all the fighting and name calling and that kind of stuff. That's not good leadership. It also makes it difficult to build consensus. And good leadership builds consensus across party lines, across our different experiences, and borders. You have to have good relationships with your native tribe, and you can't do that if you're saying disparaging things about them. I couldn't have worked with Republicans in the 6 years I spent in the legislature if I was constantly disparaging them. You're building relationships, and it's just like when your mom would tell you, be careful what you say and how you treat people because you never know when it's going to come back. I can't tell you how many times in life I've benefited from something by simply just being nice. When I was a kid, I was a paper boy, and I was hired several years later by the guy I used to deliver the paper to because of the way I was as a paper boy. He offered me a job, right? So those, and that seems really simple, but it's really happens to all of us in life, and you never know when you're going to cross paths with people again. So treating them well, working with them, being collaborative, that's what good leadership brings.
We haven't had a Democrat as a governor in a while. I think it's 1978 or it's been a minute.
Yep.
Why is it now the time? Why do you think it's time for one?
Well, we've had 15 years, almost 15 years of one party rule. And that's not healthy for any process. I don't care if it's a Democrat or a Republican. And you have to ask yourself, are your schools better than they were even 10 years ago, 20 years? Is the healthcare situation getting any better? Are our roads being maintained and taken care of properly? I drive on state highways and county highways that have potholes filled with gravel. That's ridiculous. We've got these water issues. We have a government and leaders throughout the state that are not listening to the people of South Dakota. When you think about the tip out here in Rapid City, when you think about the CO2 pipeline, when you think about the prison, people are upset. And they're upset because they feel like there's a lack of transparency and they're not being heard. Look at the ballot measures that we passed over the last 10, 12 years, whether it's recreational medicinal marijuana, whether it's the minimum wage increase or the expansion of Medicaid. Each and every time, our legislator and our governors have come back and tried to undo the voice and the will of the people. And they're basically saying, we know better than you. And sometimes there are things that people in government will know that the average citizen doesn't. But that's your job as an elected official to be able to explain that. They're not communicating. And so I think that folks are ready for leadership that listens, learns, and then has a plan. I've spent my entire life, whether it's been in politics, business, or as a community organizer, building consensus, bringing people together, and building a better community, building a better business, building a better organization. And I would really like the opportunity to do that for the state of South Dakota.
You touched on water again. What legislation do you think needs to happen in South Dakota? We're a very open for business state. We're kind of known for that in the country, but what legislation do you think needs to happen to address the concerns of South Dakotans with these data centers?
Whether it's data centers or even mining, I think it's all right to have strict laws. People will say, well, Democrats are the ones that overregulate. But if you go across the border to Wyoming, you will see very strict mining practices and policies. And that is there to protect the environment, to protect water, and to ensure that we have clean, reliable drinking water. So I don't think this is a Republican or Democrat issue. This is about preserving natural resources. And I think we need to have a conversation across the state and once again, include our communities and determine what are the best practices. What do our communities want? If they want this mine here, okay,
What are we going to do to make sure that they're a good neighbor, that they're responsible, and that we're not going to be cleaning up their mess, in the next 50 years?
Regarding schools, most families have kids. How do you think you're going to address the teacher salaries where we're usually in the bottom few in the country? How are we going to address that so teachers aren't? We make a lot of teachers here. There's a lot of teachers that come out of Black Hills State University.
Mm-hmm.
How are we going to keep them here?
We're a great exporter of teachers. When I left the legislature, I think we were exporting about 62% of our teachers and our nursing graduates from universities. That's not a sustainable model. Once again, we have some state programs that allow for payback. Now, whether or not those are robust enough is certainly something that we should be considering and looking at, or why more people aren't taking advantage of those programs. Those are immediate things that can be done right away. I think that improving the funding that we give and our ongoing commitment, a reliable one, is also critical in allowing schools to plan for wage increases. This up and down all the time without any idea of what they're going to get, and most of the time not keeping up with inflation, is not a sustainable model. So there's that aspect of it. We also need to think about how we're talking about education. For the last 20 years, many of our elected leaders are disparaging education. They're disparaging teachers. And you see that when somebody goes, well, they only work 9 months out of the year, right? Assuming that they don't have to get a job to help sustain themselves the other 3 months. So we have to, good leaders talk about things in an appropriate manner. Once again, we get away from the disparaging of profession, right? We start talking about education in a positive way, because teachers are feeling that too. I've spent the last 10 years substituting in our local school district, and teachers and administrators and faculty are frustrated. They're frustrated because they're not getting support, and they're not getting support because leaders are talking poorly about them. Then parents don't support them, and then that job becomes incredibly hard. I witnessed it firsthand. But we have a bigger problem that you touch on about retaining teachers. We're not just losing them to other states now. We're losing them from the profession altogether. In the last 3 years I've spent substituting in my local school district, I've watched 5 teachers leave the profession completely. They're not teachers retiring. They're young teachers. And they're leaving for better paying jobs. Actually, 2 days ago, I got a call from a former employee of mine who's been a teacher for several years now. And he was just catching up, wanted to find out what was going on with the campaign. He was really excited I was running. And we started talking about his new job. I said, new job? I didn't tell you. He goes, I'm not teaching anymore. He was a math teacher, something that we really need in this state and is in short demand. He left to go into the financial sector. And this is a guy with a master's degree that's getting paid less than I did working for the South Dakota Democratic Party. And I don't make a bunch of money working for the South Dakota Democratic Party. In fact, I would make, in the private sector, I'd make twice what I'm making now. And here's a guy with a master's degree who's teaching who's making less than I do. And it's just, I talked to him a little bit about it. Some of it is what we've already talked about. Some of it's about time and being able to have time with your family. Being a teacher is very demanding. So if you're not getting respect, if you're not getting pay, and then you're losing time with your family on top of it, is it worth it? I mean, how many of us would do that? So we've got a lot of work to do. I don't think there's any one easy solution. I do think taking a look at the programs that already exist, changing the tone of how we look at education, and then having at least some kind of base, guarantee that is meaningful and allows schools to plan ahead instead of one-time monies that we talk about all too often, then I think we improve education. And the follow-up to that overall, when we're talking about these types of increases, people say, well, that means you got to raise taxes. It's simply not true. What we have right now is the way we budget, we do a projection on revenue. And almost every year, the governor's office comes in
and comes in with a lowball number. And the legislature usually takes that number just a little above. They underestimate the revenue. And you hear, oh, we got $63 million surplus. We got $100 million surplus. We've had $300 million in surplus over the last 3 years. That's money that's not getting invested. It's either a little bit gets set aside like Larry Roden did this year and said, well, here's 14 million of the 63 million for the legislature to decide what they do with it. No, the legislature decides what the priorities are. I'm a guy running for governor, and I'll tell you that that's a legislature priority. I mean, I'll share mine too, but that's for them to decide. And instead, they take the bulk of that and they throw it in reserves for the rainy day. We've gone through some pretty rough patches, and we have not touched those dollars. So when is it raining enough that we do something about it? When is it raining enough that we start investing in all these things that that are starting to slide in South Dakota, whether it's healthcare, education, infrastructure, you name it? When is it raining enough for us to tap into that? And we have all this money sitting in reserves, and that's fine. Do we really need any more in reserves? We have more reserves in South Dakota than the state of Texas. It's ridiculous. We should be taking that money that they call extra every year. That should be invested up front. And if for some reason revenues come in lower than projected, then that's my job to spend down and be as frugal as I can be. But I know that they have a really good revenue estimator in their office. He's phenomenal. And I trust him. And I would even trust him as governor, even though he'd be in a different branch. So I think that there are people out there that do a very good job at this, and we just need to be investing up front.
You answered way more than any of my questions I had. Do you have anything else you want to add or anything you want to touch on?
I want your readers, I want your listeners to feel comfortable with voting for a Democrat. It's less about the letter and more about the person. We need people that are willing to do the hard work, that are willing to listen to the people of the state and actually address these concerns and issues that are challenging us here in South Dakota. I offer that. I like working across the aisle. I don't care what flavor or brand you call yourself. I just want to go in and get some work done, and I want to work with all of you. I think that that's what I want, the voters of South Dakota to know. If you think things are getting better, I'm not seeing it. I think most people aren't seeing it. So let's try something different. And in 4 years, if you don't like it, it's really easy to get rid of me, right? So you just change your vote. Because I've been in the minority, I've worked in the minority my entire life. So South Dakota has nothing to lose. I think they have a lot to gain by taking a different path.